Welcome to HOARDGANIZE with professional organizer Rachel Seavey. Every Sunday at 6 p.m., Rachel shares her expertise and compassionate approach to help you deal with overwhelming clutter. Rachel?
Hey, collectors. Welcome to the HOARDGANIZE podcast. I'm your host, professional organizer Rachel Seavey, and today I'm thrilled to have Janine Adams on our podcast. Janine is a certified professional organizer and a genealogy blogger, speaker, and consultant. She started Peace of Mind Organizing in St. Louis, Missouri in 2005 and got serious about her genealogy research in 2012. That's when she started her popular blog, Organize Your Family History, and really started digging into her own roots. She co-hosts the podcast, Getting to Good Enough, with life coach Shannon Wilkinson. Every week they talk about various aspects of letting go of perfectionism so you can do more of what you love. Janine, thank you so much for being on the HOARDGANIZE podcast. I really value your expertise on ancestry.com and genealogy. I know a lot of the listeners here, and my clients included, and myself included, have no idea where to start when it comes to genealogy. So we'd love to hear anything that you have to say about it.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I love talking about genealogy. I love genealogy so much, and I love organizing so much. So this is great to get to talk about both of those things. I think a lot of people get started with genealogy when maybe they hear some family stories that they want to explore, or they get handed a family history that a cousin has written, or in my case, it was my grandfather's cousin. So it was an oldish family history. And now a lot of people are taking DNA tests, and many of them are doing it, I think, to find out their ethnicity, what percentage Irish are you or whatever. But then if they're taking ancestry.com's DNA test, that takes them to the ancestry.com site, and you can find cousins there who might be doing genealogy, and maybe that piques your interest. So there's lots of reasons people get going with it. But I think what can happen sometimes, and this happened to me probably 20 years ago, is I just dove in and I started clicking around on Ancestry or on Family Search, which is the Mormon Church's amazing genealogy website. And I took everything I read as truth without doing any investigation, and I just added it to my tree. Now, back then, in my case, I was writing a tree on paper. But nowadays, people on Ancestry can very, very easily create a tree, and they just click and add and grow and grow. And you hear people say, "Oh, I've traced my roots back to the 14th century," and probably there's not a lot of documentation back to the 14th century, so they may not have made a documented tree back there. So my big piece of advice for anybody who is starting to do genealogy is to make sure that every fact they put on their tree has some sort of source document to go with it. When I think about what I love about genealogy is that I get to play detective. I get to solve mysteries. Like, I'm Nancy Drew every day that I do research. And today I was thinking about it, and I realized that if a detective went back to their client, or if they're in the police, went back to their superiors and said, "Hey, I solved the mystery. So-and-so told me this," without any evidence or any backup documentation, they would be told to get back to work. And unfortunately, many, many genealogists who are starting out are just taking as truth whatever they see in somebody else's tree. And then what happens, and this is what happened to me, is you realize you can't trust anything. And if you can't trust anything in your tree, especially if it's the foundation of your tree, you've got a very shaky tree, right? So I started over, and I started to do it right. That was about 8 years ago now. So I've been slowly building a very documented tree, which is giving me a lot of satisfaction.
Wow. And so I am guilty of, I took the swab, I sent it in, and they gave me my nationalities and stuff, and it was really exciting. But then I got overwhelmed. Is that pretty normal? I mean,
oh yeah.
Okay. So what do you suggest as like a beginning step?
Well, I think that if you got overwhelmed by all the things you could research on Ancestry. Yeah. So I think that starting with yourself And then moving your way up a tree is a great way to start. So you have yourself, you have your parents and your grandparents and your brothers and sisters and cousins. And for each person, you typically want to grab the basic information that people start out with is birth, death, and marriage. And so you're looking for birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage certificates. And then and censuses, oh my goodness, how could I forget censuses? So the most recently available United States census is 1940. But the 1950 census will be released in 2022. Can't wait. And so you can look on the censuses that your relatives were alive in, your ancestors. Starting in 1850, those censuses have individuals' names. Before that, they just have the head of households' names. But from 1850 to 1940, 90 years, except the 1890 census was burned, so it's really 8 censuses. You can see where people lived. You can see brothers and sisters, and it gives you a little bit of a sense of their lives. So birth, marriage, death, and censuses are the basic first bits of information that people look for and are usually fairly easy to find. Not always, but fairly easy to find on places like Ancestry.
Wow. So once you've gotten, so I guess just to clarify, so other people could be putting misinformation on their family trees on Ancestry, or so you'd want to start with that hardcore document that you're researching. It's the birth. I love that. That's great. And then starting from yourself and moving up, I think is brilliant. You know, it's like, if you don't know this kind of thing, you don't really know where to start. And it feels a little bit overwhelming at times when they're emailing you, like, you might have a relative here or there.
All right.
And so really making sure you have the facts and the documentation to prove, okay, that's very cool.
Right. And so, and you can keep track of that on Ancestry itself if you want. You can just build a tree. They make it very easy to link those documents to each fact on your tree. I, however, prefer to download the documents onto my hard drive, and then I build a tree in software. The one I use is Reunion, but there are lots of family tree software packages, and I do that so that I'm not beholden to pay a subscription forever. To Ancestry.
Clever. Yeah.
And then I have this probably unreasonable concern that what if Ancestry goes out of business, and there's all my research is with them. They have control of all my research. So I prefer to download everything, and I try to keep a tree on Ancestry as well so I can help others. I'm not that good at keeping it up, but I do have a tree there, and it's also helpful with my DNA matches so they can see my tree. That's sort of the other, I think the important message is make sure you have source documentation. Don't go on someone's tree and just assume everything is correct. Now, you might go to someone's tree and see that they do have source documents, which is great. Okay, so having all those source documents is great. You can get them from other people's trees. You can click right on them and then download them or add them to your tree. But what you want to avoid is those trees that have a fact and there's either no source or the source is Ancestry public trees. Because that's not a real source.
Okay.
So what you want are documents that you can look at. And
wow.
The other thing that way you might keep from getting overwhelmed was what I did is consider just at the beginning, researching your direct lines. So your father, your mother, their parents, and so forth. And not filling in the whole tree with all the siblings, which they call collateral lines in genealogy. That could help narrow things down for you at the beginning. However, those collateral lines are really helpful when you really get into it, because they provide really valuable clues. So I had to go back and add all the brothers and sisters from the censuses, because I didn't gather that information at first because I was so overwhelmed by it.
Okay.
But the thing I try to keep in mind is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's not like I'm trying to learn everything I can by the end of the year. I'm literally going to do this the rest of my life, I think. So I just keep slowly working my way through all this stuff. And it's very rewarding when I find something that I've been looking for a long time because my skills got better, or maybe someday a DNA cousin will solve a big mystery for me that I haven't been able to figure out. So I just stick with it.
Nice. And is Ancestry the only website out there that does kind of the family tree and the DNA testing, or are there other ones out there?
Ancestry is the one that does the best job of combining DNA and genealogy.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
but there are other websites that do a great job of providing documents for genealogy, like familysearch.org, which is the Mormon Church's website. As you maybe know, the Church of Latter-day Saints is big into genealogy, and they have provided so much help to genealogists for a very long time. They've gone into courthouses around the country and microfilmed their records, and now they're digitizing those microfilms. So now from the comfort of your computer, you can go on familysearch.org and do searches on for your relatives, and because they have volunteers who index the digital images, so they're going through the censuses and saying what names are on each page, you can actually pull up searches. Same is true at Ancestry, although their indexers aren't volunteers. And you can search that way. And that's a great way to start. It's a great, easy way to get into finding things without a lot of effort. Sometimes though, the documents are there, but they haven't been indexed. So you have to dig a little bit deeper. And that's when things get fun. I think the harder it is, the funner it is well, that's not true. The harder it is, the harder it is. But the harder it is, the more fun it is when you make a discovery that when it falls in your lap, it's a little bit less of a thrill. So I really, truly enjoy the hunt. Yeah. And there are lots of ways to look for documents in both websites that don't involve just putting in your ancestor's name. You can go into their card catalogs and look through collections and browse through, if you think you know where someone should be living on a census. This happened to me. I could not find this family. I was really confident where they were, but they were not coming up on a search. So I just went through that town and just started browsing and scanning with my eyes each page. And I found them because the person who had read the old handwriting that, from 1870 had completely botched what the handwriting said. And I was looking for a specific name, so it jumped out at me because I was looking for it. But in the index, it was wrong. With that kind of thing happens a lot. So
interesting. That sounds fun. It sounds really
right?
cool. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you think it sounds fun. I started to think to myself, I'm describing what to me is really fun, but for a lot of people might sound horrible. But I think it's great.
I see a lot of people with like notebooks. I don't know if it's the old-fashioned way, just regular, wire-bound notebooks, and they've got all this like handwritten information, and it's like, oh, that's genealogy that I'm going to do one day. And so this sounds like a lot less tedious way of going through stuff. Is Family Circle free?
Family Search, yeah.
Family Search,
100% free. You have to register, but it's free.
Great.
It's just part of what they're doing, what the church is doing for genealogists, which is it's part of their religion. They're doing it for themselves.
I had no idea. No, honestly, I had no idea that they were so involved with genealogy, and that's great that they've got volunteers and that it's free. One thing that did hold me up with Ancestry is the subscription. It's like, I didn't know if I really, knowing myself well enough, I just felt like it would be a monthly fee that I wasn't taking advantage of as well. So it's nice to know that you can kind of dabble a little bit if you want with the Family Search and the stuff that you do get on Ancestry for free, and not be so committed to paying a price monthly.
Yeah, exactly. If you're casual about it, or if you're just starting out, it doesn't make sense to pony up a lot of money. I think Ancestry is well worth the subscription for somebody like me who's really serious about it. It's an amazing treasure trove of information, but Family Search also has much of the same information. They're working in, actually they work in tandem sometimes. I mean, there are some things that you see on Family Search that takes you to Ancestry and vice versa. Although I think if you don't have a subscription to Ancestry, I'm not sure what happens. And then they're also doing actually digitizing the same documents so that you have two different scans. So I've had an experience where the scanning of one of the documents that I was looking at, that page was messed up. Like, and then I found it, that was on Ancestry, and then I found it on Family Search, and it was perfect. So, yeah. And the other thing I wanted to mention is many libraries, at least in the US, have Ancestry library edition. So you can go to your library and without paying, search on Ancestry.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that. Oh, that sounds like a great option.
Yeah. And then another thing is that I'm not sure why, but for some documents available at Family Search, you have to be in a Family Search affiliated library in order to access it. So I'll be at home and it will say, oops, you can't access that particular document. You have to do it at the library. So then I make a note. And when I go to the library, which happens to be, it's just my county library headquarters, but they're an affiliated library, I can then see the documents there and download them to my computer.
Oh, that's fun. I like that. That makes it definitely more convenient and less of a commitment for people that are just starting out.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, I know a lot of us come from different countries, especially as you go back in time. Do you feel like it's just the United States that's been well documented, or do you feel like other countries have been documented as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I will say that from my own experience, I haven't gone back to, I'm still working in the United States. My families came over really early in this country. So I don't have personal experience, but I know that there are websites in other countries, like MyHeritage is UK based, where they have all these, it's a similar service to Ancestry, where all these documents are available. So I think many countries are well documented. The question is, are the documents readily available online? And so I'm less sure about that, at least especially when you get outside of Europe. But you know what? Before all this online stuff, the way people did genealogy was they took those spiral bound notebooks and they went to their courthouses, or they took trips to the father country or the mother country, and they went to the churches and they dug in the records. So doing, traveling, leaving the house to do genealogy is a great idea as well. I try to take trips. I took a week-long trip to Kentucky, where one branch of my family was from more in the 19th century, and had a great time, because I have a weird idea of fun, I guess. But I had a great time digging around in these libraries and finding things that I had not been able to find online. So it's not, you can do a great job online, but you can do even more if you actually leave your office.
Wow, that's great to know.
Yeah.
Do you have any other tips or tricks or ideas or suggestions for how to find your roots or genealogy?
Well, I think one of the tricky things for everybody is how to organize all this information that you find. So here we're constantly downloading documents or finding documents, and we want to be able to find them again, right? So I think a lot about that, and I write about it on I have a blog called organizeyourfamilyhistory.com, and I write a lot about it on my blog. I think what's worked for me is having a consistent file naming protocol. So when you download a document from, say, Ancestry, it comes with just this crazy long alphanumeric file name, right? That you would never find in a million years. So I immediately change the file name to something that's part of it simple, has the year and the type of document and the name of the person, essentially. And then I have a folder structure on my computer. I use a Mac, where I have a folder for each individual that I'm researching. And so the document goes in that, and that's nested in a folder by surname, by last name. So then I can attach that document to the source citation in my genealogy software. And it's all, everybody's talking to each other. And I can easily find, if I'm looking to see what I know about an ancestor in my software, I can click on the source and actually look at it to verify it if I want. So that's part of the puzzle. But the other part is like keeping track of what you're doing and what you want to do next and what you want to do down the road, like keeping track of that document that I found on my computer that I have to go to the library to look at. And so I use Evernote for that stuff. I have a genealogy stack of notebooks in Evernote. One is called Family History Library Lookups, or Library Lookups. I've got follow-up notebooks for each of my surnames that I'm researching. So because it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole, I
Yeah.
could be researching, go in there with a question about one grandfather and find just like the ancestry will put in front of me information about another ancestor, and I have to resist it, right? So I put that link in a follow-up notebook, or that question in Evernote, a follow-up, to make a note to look that up later when I'm working on that family. I also keep a research log. Genealogists talk a lot about research logs, about having a place where you write down what you're doing, what you did, and what you found, what you didn't find, and what to work on next, essentially. And there's lots of templates for spreadsheets for that. And I had a hard time with that. I recognized the utility of it, but I could never get myself to do it. And so for me, what has worked is creating a very informal, very, very imperfect research log where I basically just free write what I did. And then I always put next steps, which is the key. So then the next time I sit down to research, I can go right to the last session's note and say, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. Oh yeah, I need to find out about that. Because my memory is so bad. And I used to think I could remember what I wanted to work on next. And I found out quickly that I couldn't. And when I started doing this in 2012, my biggest problem, I think, was feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really was like when I would sit down to research, it would be like, what am I going to work on? And I had all these people I could work on, and I would get paralyzed. So just having that, what action am I going to take next? That was huge, and has made a big difference for me. And it's not a picture perfect research log by any stretch of the imagination, but it's so much better than nothing. that,
Yeah.
oh, and I just thought of something else, another point I wanted to make. When I talked about having a source document for everything, the other part of that is you need to have a source citation. So in genealogy, people get really wrapped up in some people get wrapped up in having a real proper source citation, which is important. It's important to be able to find the document again.
Yeah.
Or to be able to have somebody who you give this research to, maybe it's even in a future generation, be able to find that document again. But I think because the citations can be so formal, they're kind of scary, and people just don't do it rather than do it wrong. And I believe that having a good enough source citation is important. Like, know why it is you or want one. For me, it's I want to be able to find it again, and then just make sure that there's enough information there that it could be found. And when I was in college and I was writing papers and I had to write footnotes, and then the professor would be all worked up about exactly the word order in the footnotes, and I would get really tense about that. It's the same sort of thing. So I let go of that tension with source citations. Make sure I always have one, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
And a source citation, how is that different from the naming convention that you save it as? Is it an additional document, or?
It's in my genealogy software. If I say that my great grandfather was born on January 3rd, 1895, then it's like a footnote. Source citation is like a footnote. Then I have a number next to it, and it says where I got that piece of information. And I might have multiple documents that told me that he was born that day. And I put them all on there. Like the census it provides further evidence if it says that in 1920 he was 25 years old, right? So then I add that footnote to that piece of information as well. So ideally, I have many sources for every fact, and each one of those sources is a citation, and a single source citation can go toward many facts about many people. So if it's a census, for example, and there's 10 kids in the family, that one source of that particular census taken on that particular day in that particular location would go for all 10 of those kids plus their parents. Does that make sense?
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
I think a lot about perfectionism, because I have a podcast about perfectionism, and about how perfectionism can get in the way of us in our lives. And I'm working on a talk that I'll be giving at this big genealogy conference in February called, the conference is Roots Tech, and the talk is called The Imperfect Genealogist. So I've been thinking a lot about how those things that we can be good enough about, and those things that are really important to make sure you do right. And in my opinion, it's really important to make sure you have a source document for every fact and a
Yeah.
good citation. But I don't have to have a perfect research log, thank goodness. And I don't have to make sure that it's my research, that I pick the perfect format or the perfect software. I just have to pick the software that works for me. So yeah.
What is your podcast on perfectionism called? How can people listen to that?
Oh, thank you. It's called Getting to Good Enough. And it's we have a website, gettingtogoodenough.com, but it's available on, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Play or Google Podcasts. I never use it, so I'm not sure what the word is. My co-host is a life coach, and we talk a lot about getting past perfectionism so you can do more of what you love.
I love that. I mean, that's something that our clients definitely struggle with as far as organization goes. I mean, genealogy is kind of the same thing. You want to be accurate and you want to be precise, but having the permission to not be perfect really makes it like, okay, as long as I have that source citation and I have the proof. I loved your analogy of, a police person saying, hey, this is, what happened, and the sergeant or whatever saying, get back to work. We need facts, because it is a little overwhelming if you don't know where to start. I mean, you've helped me so much. So you would start with yourself. And does that mean like uploading your own birth certificate and marriage certificate and divorce certificate or whatever?
Right. It could, if you could add it to your software. On Ancestry, they don't reveal the names of living people, so it's a privacy thing. So you probably wouldn't upload your own birth certificate because you're alive. Because you're alive, or your parents if they're alive.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
But my dad's still alive, and my parents' marriage certificate I found on Ancestry. So, but on my tree, his face is, his name isn't there, I don't think.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once my mom passed away and I added her death date to her entry, then her name became visible.
Interesting.
But yeah, you could, if you're thinking about doing genealogy research to help those after you, do you have children?
Mm-hmm, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So if your son gets into genealogy or his daughter gets into genealogy, then yeah, it would be nice to have that information for them. But I haven't done that. I just started with my name as the root of the tree, but I actually don't have any. I think I bet you I have a source citation that's something like personal knowledge for my own birth. Although actually, I don't know. I bet I have my birth certificate on there now that I think about it. But I haven't done my brother's, and I haven't done my husband, and I don't think my marriage certificate is there. But my parents are there. And the other thing that I just want to throw out there is, especially if you're doing online research, I encourage people to resist the temptation to print everything, because paper is huge problem for genealogists, and getting how to organize it, keeping it organized, keeping the piles from piling up. When I started out, I was printing everything, and now I print nothing because I download it and I file it immediately because I have a workflow in place to do that.
Oh, and that's great for people that struggle with organizing paperwork. I mean, that's just really helpful.
Yeah.
How about any other tips or tricks to navigating ancestry.com specifically? Do you feel like you have any insider knowledge?
Well, there's a lot of great information on Ancestry out there. If they have Ancestry Academy, which has classes on using Ancestry, they used to charge extra for them, but they don't anymore. Probably you have to have a subscription to take them, but you don't charge extra. There's Krista Cowan is one of their employees, and she has a video series called The Barefoot Genealogist on YouTube that has great information on tips and tricks and so forth. But the stuff that I've learned, and I've learned this by listening, by watching those things, and also I go to a lot of genealogy conferences, and I've heard these folks speak a lot. On Ancestry, you have a search drop-down menu, and you can search all collections, or you can choose different collections to search. And the temptation is always to search all collections, because why wouldn't you, right? You want to search everything. But when you do that, you're they're not actually, I don't think, searching everything, and your result, you might not get deep. Well, I think you're going to get a ton of results, and then you have a hard time filtering through them to get to the stuff that you're after. So if you know, for example, that you're looking for a birth certificate, you're better off starting with search birth, death, and marriage database than you are searching all collections. Or censuses, same thing. And if you know where they lived and where that birth certificate might be found, you can narrow things down even more, so that your search results aren't so huge. That said, I have had the experience where I got too specific in my search parameters and couldn't find what I was looking for. I remember looking really hard for this one person on the 1920 census, and I finally found him living with his brother, who was an adult. He was a juvenile. And the problem had been that he was 12, and it looked, when the census enumerator wrote it down, it looked like 42. So I had been looking for a 12-year-old kid, and so it wasn't coming up because the index had him at 42.
Interesting.
So
So there's some human error that goes into some of the input, or the handwriting, or the copying. And okay, so that's good to know too.
And the other thing to think about is, like with censuses, people were going door to door and writing down the information. So there is so much human error that can go to that, because who knows who answered the door?
Yeah.
And so you can't take census information as true fact. You just sort of try to compare censuses, through the 1910 with the 1920 with the 1930. And if there are discrepancies, that doesn't mean that's not your right person. It's just, who knows what happened that day. Maybe Uncle Joe, who was drunk, answered the door, or maybe your ancestor was visiting his cousin that day and wasn't home, and so therefore, depending on how much of a stickler the enumerator was, he may not have been put on the census. I have one family that's on the census twice, because they moved. They were there for the census. They moved like a week later, and then the census guy came to their new house in a different city, and
oh my gosh,
counted them. Yeah, so
that sounds like fun, though. All this investigating and trying to figure out. I think a lot of people listening would actually like that sort of a thing. I know I do. I just felt so overwhelmed when I went on there, so I'm feeling a lot better.
Yay!
Yeah, no, it's hard when you're not used to a certain platform, and then you don't know what you're really looking for. So I feel like you've given really good kind of like, first start with yourself and your parents, and it's easy, like you said, to go down a rabbit hole. I found myself doing that on my trial month or whatever. I just was spending a lot of time, with my mouth open, just like, who is this? What am I doing? And so I love the idea of actually doing the research and finding out these documents and seeing them. I mean, it must be really neat to be able to find like your great grandparents' birth certificate or death certificate. I mean, it must be so satisfying to dig through and find all that stuff.
Yeah, newspaper research is really fun too. If you can find, on my research trip last summer, I found this great article on my great-great-grandfather, who I've been spending a lot of time researching, and it had a little drawing of him, and I had never seen what he looked like. So that was really neat.
Cool.
I mean, there's just so much out there that when you put your mind to it, you can find, and it is like literally the never-ending hobby. I mean, literally, I can't imagine ever thinking it's done.
And that's really good to know as well, because you think, okay, I'm going to get this done this month or this year. Okay, good. So being realistic, not being too much of a perfectionist, but also staying organized. I love that.
And what I tend to do is try to focus on a particular family or line. If you think of your grandparents, each of their last names, so you have 4 surnames, your grandmother's maiden names and your grandfather's last names. I usually pick one of those lines to focus on each year. Although I've been sticking with the same one for a couple of years now.
I love that.
There's so many
Okay.
people that you can still, that within one line, there's so many people depending on how far back you're going. So having a tree, some software where you can keep track of who's who is really helpful.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously I could talk about this all day.
It's such an interesting topic. I don't know anything about my father who died when I was younger, and so it's something that I definitely have thought about, but just didn't even know where to begin looking or.
Oh, yeah. Well, that might be a great way to feel connected to your father. So I would start by trying to find his death certificate, and that would give you his parents' names probably.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
could start researching them if you don't know their names already. You could start researching them on the censuses and so forth. And
That's so interesting. That's really cool. I mean, I definitely want to spend time doing this. And I think a lot of us do. We just don't even know where to start. And it's good to know that Ancestry is somewhat, reliable. And I mean, you might have to research and dig through, but it seems like, you don't have too many issues with it unless it's a human entry. And so that's good to know as well.
right. As long as you're not just taking someone else's research that's bad and assuming it's true. So that's the big caveat with Ancestry is don't just take information from other people's trees, and because you might be passing along bad information. It doesn't do you good. Yeah, so if you're focusing on the documents that are available on Ancestry, then it's a tremendous resource and can be really, really helpful. The other thing that to think about if you do go with Ancestry is whether you want your tree to be public or private. It's a whole thing. I had a big discussion on my blog about it. Yeah, I chose to go with public because I don't put anything on my tree that I don't know is accurate. So I'm not worried about sharing bad information. But some people feel like people are just taking my research. I did all this work. If I make it a public tree and someone just takes my research, then they feel bad about it. So I don't quite understand that perspective because I think sharing is a lot of what genealogy is about. But if you've done your DNA as you have, if you have a public tree or if your DNA cousins have a public tree, it's a lot easier to make that connection with them. You can actually see where you're related, or try to anyway. So
Interesting. Okay.
If you go for it, I encourage public trees, but I encourage public trees only if the data are good.
Yeah. And I love your suggestion of not printing things out. I know a lot of my listeners struggle with paper, so being able to download them, you save it as a name that you can easily search on, like you said, the year, the type of document, the name. What about any other tips or tricks? I mean, I feel like you've gotten me ready to just at least get started on this quest, which is
yeah. Well, I guess my last piece of suggestion is, as you're getting started on the quest, resist the temptation to just keep clicking on the next thing. Stop and download the document and document somewhere, either on your Ancestry tree or in genealogy software, what you found, or in a research log, because you'll forget. And guaranteed. And so it's so much fun to just keep going, and the searching is the fun part, the discovery, but unless you document it, it doesn't do you any good. So again, slow yourself down so that you're doing it thoroughly and you can trust whatever it is you found. I mean, you can trust it because you found the document, but you want to be able to correlate it with a fact. So you need to do what I call processing the document, which is taking all the information from it and putting it into your software, into your family tree, so that you can actually access it later, because you'll forget. Guaranteed.
These are great tips.
Good.
And I guess, do you know of any other resources or that people can use?
Oh gosh, there are many local genealogy societies. So if you contact or go to the Facebook group of the Genealogy Society where your ancestors resided, that can be very helpful if you're stuck. Or I belong to the St. Louis Genealogical Society, even though I don't have St. Louis ancestors. I have Missouri ancestors, but the other side of the state. But they do a genealogy conference every year. It's very very helpful people. And so that Facebook is a great source. There are groups that are related to surnames, especially if you have an unusual last name, that can be helpful. There's Facebook groups for organizing your genealogy, just for general genealogy questions. I see people all the time posting like a close-up from a census, and they can't read the handwriting of like the occupation. Can anyone tell what this says? And people pipe up what they think it says.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah,
I love
Facebook
that.
is a really great resource for genealogy.
And
YouTube as well. There's
YouTube.
and there's lots of great genealogy blogs. I mean,
yeah, tell me about your genealogy blog. How does someone find that?
That really isn't why I mentioned that, but it's called organizeyourfamilyhistory.com. And I try to blog twice a week. It's
wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I try. I also have an organizing blog at my business's website. So I'm blogging 4 times a week, which sometimes it doesn't get done. I think I only blogged twice last week. But at Organize Your Family History, I talk about organizing family history, but I also talk about my own discoveries and lessons learned and stuff. I have a very nice group of readers who comment a lot. And I do what I call a 30 by 30 challenge periodically, and I'll be doing one in January, where I challenge myself and anybody else who wants to participate to do 30 minutes of genealogy research every day for 30 days.
Wow.
And if you do that, if you get into the groove of doing that, it really keeps you connected with your research and makes it you lose a lot of that feeling of overwhelm, because you haven't stepped away from it for a while. You're right there in the midst of it. And I love doing it. And if I have a challenge going, I do it. If I don't have a challenge going, I might not do it. So I have challenges pretty often.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so people can find you on your podcast. People can find you on your genealogy blog. How do people find you if they want professional organizing help?
My business is Peace of Mind Organizing. So my website is peaceofmindorganizing.com. And I have a blog there as well. And then, the usual stuff about my services and so forth.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Wow. You're so active with your blogging. That's really cool. I love that. It's nice to be able to find information. And the genealogy sounds really cool. I'd be interested in taking the challenge. I think it would be really, so let me know, send me an email and I'll actually take the challenge and try and research my father's side of the family and see if I can get anywhere by February. That would be kind of fun.
Very cool. Well, yeah, absolutely. I'd love, and if I can be helpful, don't hesitate to ask.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It was just so fun. Is there anything else you want to say? Or
no, I think we've covered it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you've covered a lot. And I'm really interested in the 30 by 30 challenge. And hopefully my listeners will jump on board and hop over to your blog or podcast and join in. It was absolutely fascinating having Janine on the podcast. I'm excited to start researching my family history. I hope you all are excited as well. And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed, click the notification bell, and leave a comment. I love hearing what you have to say. Until next time, collectors, and remember, happiness is a place between too little and too much.
This has been Hoardganized with Rachel Seavey. New episodes are available every Sunday at 6 p.m. and also on the Collector Care YouTube channel. Download Rachel's Affirmations for Collectors on iTunes or Amazon.com, or sign up for Rachel's blog at collectorcare.com and receive 7 tips for clutter-free living. Thanks for listening.